Come on, little fella. Don't be shy. That's it. Come on. These little fellows have been fed diets containing genetically modified potatoes, and all these experiments are done in comparison with the non-genetically modified potatoes, so that you can pick up any differences. We only investigated these three things: growth, development, and immunity, and they were not supposed to have been touched.
We got almost 60,000 pages of internal documents. And in these internal documents, it was very clear that the scientists inside the agency said, we need to test these foods for toxicity, allergenicity, immune response, lower nutrition, and for environmental contamination. Page after page of study they said we need. None of this was done.
In precautionary science of genetic engineering, it means one question means one career. You ask one question, you get the answer, and you might or might not be able to publish it, but that's the end of your career. What's, I think, very unique in my case is that I survived.
The attack on scientists is very well structured by the biotech industry. It's systematic, it's worldwide, it's very coordinated. It's part of the way that they do business. So anywhere in the world, at any time, if someone finds a problem, they're jumped on. And if the problem is really severe, they get jumped on even more whenever there's something that comes up that can threaten this biotechnology empire.
Companies exist to make money. They don't exist to entirely for the public good. They exist to give profit back to their shareholders.
Hi, is this Tom? Hi, Tom. This is Jeffrey Smith. You're one of the more than 24 farmers that gave him a call describing problems with pigs that couldn't get pregnant because of the GM corn. Is that right? So what I may do at another time, I'm on my cell phone now, but I might actually, after we talk a bit, I might actually email you and tell you exactly what I've written down about what we've talked about to make sure it's accurate. All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. So that was good news. He said that he was willing to talk. His cell phone was dying on the battery. And he said, first thing he said was, is my name going to be in the article you're writing? So I had to put him at ease and tell him no. If not, if he didn't want it to be in the article, it wouldn't be in there. That's why we don't have a lot of whistleblowers. The farmers farmers are not interested. A lot of scientists are scared about it. And that's the whole state of the art right now, where almost all scientists focused on genetically engineered research are funded directly or indirectly by industry. So we're in a very dangerous situation because there's no real independent science. The biotech industry says all we're doing is adding a gene into the DNA. It's like a Lego where they snap it into place. But that's very untrue. When the single process of insertion can change the natural DNA in many ways that are unpredictable, and they could lead to toxins and allergens and new diseases and antibiotic-resistant diseases and nutritional problems. Most of the soy grown in the United States is Monsanto's Roundup-ready soybeans, where they take the soybeans and they put into the DNA a gene that allows the plant to be sprayed with Monsanto's Roundup herbicide. And it will kill all of the weeds around the plant, but the soybean plant will survive. So 86% of the soybeans in the United States are genetically engineered to withstand Monsanto's herbicide.
Miracle of science or Frankenstein food? How safe is the new ingredient in your diet? Professor Pushtai's lab is at Scotland's Rowett Institute, one of the leading food research centres in Europe. Scientists here are trying to find out whether long-term consumption of GM foods may affect health. The professor is so concerned about the implications of his discovery, he's decided to publicise his findings early.
As a scientist looking at it and actively working on the field, I find that it's very, very unfair to use our fellow citizens as guinea pigs. It was the first experiment because when we started in 1995, there was not a single publication on the potential or the real effects of genetically modified materials with any species, rats, mice, or humans, even though that the humans were already eating it. This is the same variety of potato, Desiree, that we used for genetic engineering in 1995. This is the particular potato variety which is one of the easiest to genetically engineer. And the point of the whole genetic modification experiment was to protect the potato against aphids, which are one of the major pests in Scotland. They attack the potato, the green parts of the potato. And we observed that that particular lectin which we used, which we took from the snowdrop bulbs, did protect the snowdrop bulbs against all sorts of pests attacks. And we had hoped that if we take that particular gene and transfer it, engineer it into the potatoes, that will also be protecting the potato against insect attacks, which in fact it did. After the animals were killed and dissected, we found out that in comparison with the non-genetically modified potatoes, their internal organs developed differently. Some of the internal organs, such as, for example, the gut, increased in size, even though that the rat itself was not growing as fast. Or some of the other tissues, for example, the liver or the kidneys, were not developing as well as the controls. And the conclusions were, and this is important, they found in those data 36 very highly significant differences between the GM-fed animals and the non-GM-fed animals.
So, even though I'm not a scientist, I worked with more than 30 scientists over 2 years to document the known health risks of genetically engineered foods. And the first part of the book is the documented health risks. And there's 65 different health risks divided into sections. Now, the first one that I chose to highlight within evidence of reactions is Dr. Pustai's work. And the reason why is that Arpad pointed out that it was basically the process itself of genetic engineering that caused this significant damage. So only the genetically engineered potatoes caused the problem. The rats that were fed the natural potatoes along with the same insecticide did not have the same problems. So his brilliant design showed that it wasn't the insecticide that caused the problems. It was somehow the process of creating the genetically engineered potato. And he used the same process that's used to create the other genetically engineered crops on the market.
The immune system takes about 10 days to get in top gear. So if we do a short-term trial, we wouldn't have seen the end result. If I had the choice, I would certainly not eat it till I see at least comparable experimental evidence which we are producing for our genetically modified potatoes. Those 150 seconds were boom, 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 and everybody got the message. Everybody got the message. They asked me, would you eat it? I said, no, certainly not the GM potatoes we worked on. If I could avoid it, I would certainly avoid it. The other piece of the message was that, so what do we want? And I said that what we want is to be more testing, more biological testing, and we should not use, and that they got that. This message originated from us, that they should not use our fellow citizens as human guinea pigs.
When he was asked to speak on television, he had enormous pressure. He was one of the few people on earth that realized that the GM crops on the market might be causing all that damage in the gut and in the brain and in the organs of the entire population. And so with permission from his director, he was interviewed, and then he was a hero for about 2 days at the Rowett Institute. The director praised his work, took over all the press work, put out his own press release, praising it as world-class research. And then the 2 phone calls allegedly placed from the UK Prime Minister's office forwarded through the receptionist to the director. The next morning, Arpad Pustai was fired after 35 years and silenced with threats of a lawsuit.
It is only when we think there was political pressure coming from the top that the situation changed. And then the director, to save his own skin, decided that the best way to deal with the situation, A, to destroy me, B, to make me shut up. So they invoked a contract that whatever they did say on
TV, radio, and wrote in the newspapers, I could not deny it. I could not correct it. I couldn't say what was the real situation. And then we looked at the submissions of applications by the biotech companies for those products which we're already eating. And we found out that they were flimsy, they were not scientifically well-founded, and certainly the work which was reported in them did not compare well at all with our very extensive studies.
He said it was a turning point in my life. He said, Jeffrey, I realized what I was doing and what they were doing was diametrically opposed. I was doing safety studies. They were doing as little as possible to get their foods on the market as quickly as possible. So the turning point in his life was realizing that there were other scientists in the world who were not taking care of the health of the world, were not treating science properly. You see, he's on the top level of the world. He expects other scientists to do so. So more than being fired from his job, more than these shocking moments in his life, his greatest shock was to discover that there was this whole world of scientists that would basically allow foods on the market for economic purposes.
So what we have here is 60,000 pages of documents, of internal documents of FDA in these boxes here on what happened when they suppressed their science about GMOs. Going through these documents, we've come up with, we've come up with really the central documents that really demonstrate this suppression. It's really quite remarkable. Number of documents here. You see some of the major scientists at FDA saying these GMO crops are very different. So this is early on. This is the very beginning of the regulation of genetically engineered food in the United States. Scientist after scientist says these genetically engineered foods are not equivalent, not substantially equivalent to conventional food. And that, of course, that was the position that the industry wanted. There's nothing different here. They said, oh, no, it's very different. Different proteins, viruses, different organisms inside these foods that create unique health risks. Here we see unique toxicity. These foods could be toxic. You know, there's one document in here that I think is especially important that really shows this history probably better than any other. And this had to do with their compliance in looking at the studies. And here's what the FDA scientists, their own scientists, said. And I think it's on page 18,777, right here. And they say, you know what, we need to look at how these crops change how much agrochemicals, how much pesticides we put in here. We need to see how they change water use, how much water they need, all long-term studies that were needed. Down here, we need to see what about loss of nutrients in the food? What about loss of nutrition? None of that was done. What about loss of diversity in seeds? Long-term studies recommended by the scientists, never done. Here, look at this. Changes in toxin or chemicals in the foods. Study recommended, long-term study, never done. So the scientists asked for these studies, said, let us do them. We think there's a problem here. We've taken a preliminary look. We think there's a problem. But the politicians at the FDA and in the administration at that time said, no, they suppressed the science. And these questions, these studies, have never been done. Never been done.
The question that you're asking is about the flavor saver tomato and what went into that. Curiously enough, I was actually one of the outside consultants that was in the last meeting on the flavor saver tomato, which wasn't terribly successful commercially. But the FDA scientist went through a long presentation about all the analyses they had done. And her concluding slide was, the flavor saver tomato is a tomato. So they had not found any substantial differences except for the addition of the one extra gene that actually decreased the rate at which they went soft, so they extended the shelf life. And indeed, that was the conclusion, so they had no reason to regulate it on the basis of safety.
No one gets up in the morning saying, I want to go buy a genetically engineered food. They offer no benefits, no more nutrition, no more flavor, no nothing. They only offer risks. That's all they offer to the consumer. And so the average person, of course, rational person would say, why would I buy a food that offers me no new benefits, but only risks? So it was critical for the industry to get these foods out without anyone knowing, because if they knew, they would obviously choose not to buy them.
I don't know how many years of testing you would feel comfortable with, but if I told you it was 25 years, would you feel comfortable? If I told you it was 12 years, would you feel comfortable? 6 years? At what point, how many years of testing and how many different kinds of tests would make you feel comfortable? I will tell you, as I've said before, that because these foods are tested more than any other new kinds of foods that have come on the market, I am more confident about these than I am about picking up a new package of something that the ingredients of which I don't know.
I had a long-term relationship with a group of indigenous communities. And with them, we developed the idea that transgenic materials would come to Mexico. And the problem was that when they come, nobody was there to tell them. So that's when we started thinking we should really prepare a laboratory with capacity to detect the presence of transgenic organisms. And that's where I was helping them to set up that laboratory. And the person who came to train them was my student, David Quist. We were just training, and to train you would have to have a positive control and a negative control. For the positive control, he brought corn from the US, and from the negative control, we thought we should just use the local corn, which of course is going to be clean and wonderful. And the surprise came when the negative controls started coming out positive. That means we started finding transgenic materials where they were not supposed to be. The reason why our findings were so astounding was because it was thought that there was no transgenic corn being planted in Mexico at all. And people wanted it that way. The government, the local communities, the people who lived in the city, they all wanted to have it that way, that there would be no transgenics in Mexico. Why? Because Mexico is the center of origin of corn, and the Mexican government was worried about maintaining the integrity of the land races, the national germplasm. So it was illegal to plant transgenic corn. It is still illegal today.
maize germplasm bank. It's essentially a very, very large seed library. And as you see, the collections are arranged like libraries on a shelf. There are 24,000 samples, unique samples of maize seed. Most of this is land races. These are varieties that were developed by farmers over thousands of years through their selection, and they're quite diverse. These collections are also a source of useful traits for breeders who are looking for things like insect resistance, drought tolerance, grain quality, all kinds of other characteristics. And so sometimes these old land races can be sources of genes for those kinds of characteristics. These things are slowly disappearing from the countryside as farmers adopt newer, improved varieties, and also as farmers leave the countryside, because now, as you know, there's a big problem of rural migration, and people from Africa trying to get into Europe, people from Latin America going to cities or going to the United States looking for work. So as these farmers leave the countryside, the varieties that they grow are slowly disappearing.
We're here in central Mexico, in a place where traditionally for many thousands of years corn has been planted in these lands. It's a very rich volcanic soils, and people plant corn here for many generations. Over the years, corn has changed, and more recently it has been changing because of the introgression of industrial varieties of corn, and most importantly because of the introgression of transgenic corn. We know that there is transgenic corn here, we don't know how much. And we want to be able to tell over the years, over time, whether there is more or less, what kind of transgenic materials are here. Because the transgenic manipulation is invisible, people around here don't even know that they are receiving the transgenics, and they are growing them, and they're passing them on to their children and to their neighbors and so on. So what we're trying to develop is the methods so that they can know what's happening and make their own choices and the decisions about what to do about it. One way to do it, the way most people have done it so far, is to go down to the fields and sample each one of the fields. You take a piece of a leaf and then take it to the lab. But that's very time-consuming and very difficult to do. The possibility that we are developing is the possibility of sampling the air that contains pollen grains from the corn, so that we are, in effect, looking at many fields at the same time, looking at the particles that come in the air, and then detecting the particles of corn, and within those, detecting those pollen grains that are transgenic. It's a challenging, long road that we are following. The next step for us would be to be able to have a piece of machinery that we are developing that we could move around with us. But really our goal in the end is to get ourselves out of the picture, to develop an instrument that we can make available to those people down there, and we want to enable them so that they can go into the internet and through the internet build up a map so that they can see each other on the landscape and in relationship with each other. Once we were sure that we had found transgenic materials in Oaxaca. We wanted to have a publication that would be very visible. So we sent it for publication to Nature. Nature sent this article off to experts to be reviewed 5 times around. And then Nature said, yes, we will publish it. By that time, however, the news that this information was coming out made very many people within the industry very nervous and very unhappy. So they themselves started a discreditation campaign for the paper. They did not want the paper to be published, and if it was going to be published, they wanted people not to believe what this paper was saying. Now we know the industry hired professional public relations companies, propaganda companies, who at the time were experimenting for the first time with something called viral marketing, which is the idea that a PR company, a public relations company, will go into the internet and start spreading ideas around on behalf of the companies that hire them, but without telling people that they are being paid by these companies. So this company called the Bivings Group, they created 2 fictitious characters, 2 doctors, Dr. Smetashek and Dr. I forget. And they made up 2 names, and these 2 doctors went on the internet and started spreading rumors that what we had said was false and that the paper was flawed, and so on and so forth. And the way the internet works is that people really respond to each other's opinions, and the idea started really spreading around that our paper was false and had been submitted under false and maybe illegal conditions. Whatever the case is, because we don't really know to this date, Nature decided to print 2 letters criticizing our paper, and also to print a very confusing editorial where they say, we don't want to take positions, but based on what we know now, we have doubts that we should have published the paper back then. That is completely against the way we do science. Nature itself recognizes that they had never done anything like this in 130 years, the whole history of the magazine. So there was something seriously important happening that they do not want to talk about, but I believe, I am convinced, it was pressure from these industrial actors, industrial activists, who wanted to change Nature's position towards this problem. The industry said, you don't need to worry about this because we have it under control. The control is really the question. And they had been telling the world that they really had control over these crops, that if they planted corn, transgenic corn in one field, that transgenic corn would not go anywhere else. So our discovery that we were finding transgenic corn maybe 1,000 miles from the nearest legal transgenic corn field was a huge problem for them, because it really showed very simply and with real evidence that they really did not have control. So they lost the claim to having control over these materials. And from that point on, they started talking about coexistence.
valami jót lent volt, annak a malomnak, a pofánkra neki.
Köszönöm, hogy a szép
Akkor igaz?
Aha. Ugye mennyi pörtön is?
After that explosion in 1998 August, when everybody was sort of certainly in the higher echelons of power, they were talking about all sorts of nasty things about me. We just took 2 weeks, came here, and nobody cared tuppence about or genetic modification or what I did. I was not a professor, just Arpad. That's what it is, and that really gave us a good respite, refreshed us so that we could go back and face the music again. Take care. It started to rain, and when the weather changes very fast here.
The most hurtful thing of all was that he wasn't allowed to talk to his colleagues, and his colleagues weren't allowed to talk to him. So whenever he entered the room, they went silent within seconds and wouldn't talk to each other, and of course they wouldn't talk to him. And at the same time, they started to disappear one by one, leaving him on his own. So by the end of it, we took to the habit of having our lunch separately in my office. Arpad is not the complaining time. He will never tell anybody how much was he hurt by the handling of him by the art. It was really, really very hard on him. Well, Arpad and I worked together from 1990 continuously on the same projects, and we worked together on the GM project as well. The only reason that he is allowed to talk about it, that he has been given permission by the House of Commons, the Parliament, and the Technology and Science Committee of the British Parliament. All the others in the group, including me, and we are talking about 20 people, we were forbidden to talk about what has happened to the rat, what sort of experiments did we carry out, what was going on at that time at the rat. So we were gagged, and our gagging is for lifetime. Even the Secret Service, they gag people for 25 years. If I happen to live to my 70s, it will be well over that time, and I still won't be able to talk about it.
I never actually felt outcast from the scientific community because my connection with the ordinary scientists has remained excellent. I do now regard this more like one of the most important times of my life, of thinking and reflecting on what happened. So instead of being banished from life, I became a start of a new life. You know, when you meet people like, for example, Prince Charles, then I wouldn't have met him otherwise. So I think that there are pluses, strong pluses. It is all going in the wrong direction. Now, let's assume that, and we have seen a few examples, that animals fed on GM material, they had very considerable physiological changes. Now, when you are eating that animal fed on GM, you will be eating an animal that had already been changed into a different animal. And there is no safety risk assessment done on this. And it is a policy decision by the governments and by the biotechnology industry that they would just simply go on the basis that if you don't know, they cannot be held responsible. So remember that the animal that has been fed on GM has been changed.
You always will find scientists who are diametrically opposed for one reason or another. But frankly, you have to look at the bulk of the evidence. And the bulk of the evidence is simply this. These products have been out. Virtually every food that you consume, including you in Germany, has some genetically modified product in it, okay, whether it's soybeans or corn. There has not been a single documented analyzed case of even a headache attributable to genetic modification.
I haven't read the study yet. It came out today. I immediately called my office and asked them to get me a hold of the study. So my assistant called into Austria and spoke to someone, and they're going to get me the study as soon as possible. But the finding is consistent. Fertility problems with animals fed genetically engineered crops. We saw that with soybeans, and farmers reported that with corn as well. It's very difficult to do proper studies because Monsanto doesn't allow people to use their products for studies, and they also don't allow access to the parent line so that you can compare the exact same soybean, with the only difference being that one is genetically engineered and one is not. One example is this Russian scientist, Dr. Irina Ermakova. She fed genetically engineered soy flour to rats, and more than half of the offspring died within 3 weeks. Now, one of the criticisms was that she didn't use carefully controlled genetically engineered soy along with its nearly identical non-GM soy counterpart. But Monsanto didn't allow that soy to be released into the public, so she didn't have access to it. Dr. Arpad Pustai wants to repeat that study, but he also can't get that soy for his research.
Global sales in the billions of dollars, millions of farmers and backyard gardeners have come to rely on the weed killer called Roundup.
Roundup Extended Control. It kills tough weeds fast.
What makes this product effective is glyphosate, a synthesized compound discovered by John Franz over 30 years ago.
Als hier in der Region begonnen wurde mit dem Einsatz der Gentechnik in der Sojaproduktion, hat man dann die Bauern eingeladen zu Festen und Bier gezahlt, Fleisch gezahlt, und sie sollten dann eine Hacke mitbringen. Nachdem sie dann gut gegessen haben, gut getrunken haben, dann haben sie so ein Ritual gemacht, ein mystisches Ritual. Alle Hacken in einem Kreis gebracht und sie dann verbrannt. Als Symbol dazu, dass man nie mehr Hacken braucht, nie mehr schwer arbeiten muss. Und als Geschenk bekommt dann jeder Bauer 1 Liter Glyphosat. Das sei der technische Fortschritt. Die ursprüngliche Idee, eine Gensoja zu erzeugen, ist, dass man sie resistent gemacht hat gegen Glyphosat. Glyphosat ist ein Totalherbizid, dessen berühmte Marke Roundup ist, von Monsanto produziert ist. Jetzt nach ein paar Jahren sieht man, dass immer mehr Unkräuter resistent sind gegen Glyphosat. Cornisa canadiensis, kanadisches Berufskraut auf Deutsch. Die neue Unkrautsorte, die jetzt ganz schlimm ist hier. Ja, die über die Soja herauswächst. Ja, der Vater hat gerade gesagt, dass in der Genossenschaft hier in der Gegend versucht wurde, mit Glyphosat, mit hoher Dose das zu bekämpfen. Es ist eigentlich 1 Liter pro Hektar erlaubt, gesetzlich. Und man hat 8 Liter pro Hektar verwendet und es hat immer noch nicht gereicht. Dann haben sie aufgehört mit dem Versuch. Also ist total resistent gegen Glyphosat. Rio Grande do Sul, dieser Bundesstaat hier, hat in den letzten 4 Jahren 85% mehr Glyphosat gespritzt. Also ist ganz deutlich, man spritzt mehr Herbizide, nachdem man jetzt Gensoja anbaut, als bevor. Eine Umweltkatastrophe sozusagen. Also es stimmt nicht das Argument, dass man hier mit Gensoja weniger Pestiziden einsetzen will. Vielen werden erstaunen, wenn ich sage, dass ein Gentechnikkritiker ja mit Rousseau angefangen hat. Rousseau ist für mich einer der großen Autoren gewesen. Ich hatte die studiert, habe zum Beispiel Emilio hier das Buch über Bildung, über Erziehung, inwieweit die Institutionen eigentlich die Menschen so entwickeln, wie sie heute sind und nicht, dass die Menschen so geboren sind. Und dann habe ich auch die erste Veröffentlichung hier über Rousseau geschrieben. Das war im Jahr 2000. Da habe ich eigentlich über das Konzept von Demokratie bei Rousseau geschrieben. Rousseau hat ja gesagt, dass der Ursprung der Ungleichheit zwischen den Menschen eigentlich am privaten Eigentum liegt. Und dann fing alles an. Es fing so an, dass ein Mensch ein Grundstück eingezäunt hat mit einem Zaun und sagte, das gehört mir. Und das Schlimme, hatte Rousseau gesagt, ist nicht, dass er das getan hat, sondern dass die anderen es geglaubt haben, dass es ihm gehört. Dasselbe kann man heute im Bereich Gentechnik sagen. Wir haben so eine Art neue Feudalismus. Die Naturressourcen werden privatisiert und die anderen Menschen, denen diese Naturressourcen auch gehören, zahlen, damit sie Teile von diesen Ressourcen wieder nutzen können. Und Teil davon ist sogar Wissen, was vorher schon produziert war und jetzt wieder patentiert wird. Sogar die Natur wird patentiert. Also diese neufeudalistische Zeit, in der wir leben, ist ja für mich ganz klar. Wir kommen in diesen Zeiten zurück, als ein König gesagt hat, der Fluss ist mein oder das Grundstück ist mein und die Bauern müssen dafür zahlen, wenn sie diese Naturressourcen nutzen. Damals gab es ja die Religion, um das zu legitimieren, zu rechtfertigen. Heute, merkwürdigerweise, machen die Wissenschaftler das.
Yeah, this little house came to us as a it feels something of fate. And it's in a very special place. Below us, we can see the whole of the public campus of Berkeley, the University of California, Berkeley. And we're standing at a boundary where that campus meets the private and military part of the research machine. This is a big research machine. One side of it has public, the other side is private, corporate, and military. The generation of knowledge that comes out of this place is very important for the world, not only because of technology, but also because of how we understand ourselves in our role in the world, in our role with nature. So that enclosing of the knowledge that used to be public and becomes private or becomes corporate or becomes militarized secret, that enclosure of knowledge is something that I consider to be very damaging for the movement of science and the movement of knowledge. So it is a very strong battle that is happening here and in other places in the world to try and protect that diversity of knowledge, that diversity of culture. The latest development in this battle has been the arrival here on this campus of BP, British Petroleum, who would like to be called Beyond Petroleum. BP came here offering $500 million, which is much more than anybody had ever offered the university, supposedly for research. Administrators for the university find it very difficult to say no to money. And it doesn't matter where the money comes from, they want the money. So they try to pass this contract with BP without people noticing. But we have been able to find out a few things about it. We know that BP wants new buildings in the canyon. They want buildings that are built behind the fences of the national lab so that nobody can access them. They want access to our students. They want access to our seminars so that they can find out which ideas are useful for them. They want to have control over publication, what gets published, what gets said publicly or not. But more importantly, they also want access to the curriculum, to what will be taught in the university. And because this is a public university, we also determine the curriculum of the children from kindergarten all the way to high school. And BP now has access to deciding what is called science and what is not called science. So now they can say, whoever is on our side is a scientist and whoever is not on our side is not a scientist. So the power that they gain from that is extraordinary. And they close the door shut to any public view of what's happening behind the walls, behind the fences and the screens of academic research. Unfortunately, we are in a minority, people who oppose it. And I have been very involved in trying to oppose this as well as other advances of this corporatized kind of science, this privatized kind of science, because I believe that the main problem is that people don't realize what's happening. And by the time they will wake up, it will be too late. The possibility of having a public university doing public research and developing public understanding of humanity is going to be gone. We are very far from free speech at this university. You're not allowed to ask many questions and you're not allowed to say many things. And if you do, you get into serious trouble. And I am just one of many examples where people are punished by what they say or what they research. In my case, I was pushed out of the university at least 3 times. Every time I fought back, and we managed to keep my job. But it's been very difficult. And I am grateful that there is this protection around my position right now after so many years of battle. I feel that I have this freedom, and I really intend to use it as much as possible. we are manipulating life in a way that we really do not understand, we cannot control, and then we're letting it go into the environment. So it's a change that is radical, that is unprecedented, that is beyond anything we can understand, and it's unretrievable. We cannot get it back. That's my concern. Isn't that beautiful? It is very true that the power that technocrats and experts have developed in these years is so large and so out of control that it has become much more of a religion. And it's a religion that has many dogmas, and one of those dogmas is that humans have the power to change nature the way they want. It's complete hubris because we can't.
In small rivers like this throughout the northeast of America, salmon used to come up these rivers, even small rivers like this. Wherever the salmon is born, and they're all born in little rivers like this, they come back after their journey. They stay in a river like this for almost a full season, and they go out into the ocean for 2 or 3 seasons and get quite large. But they always come back to rivers just like this to spawn. Salmon teach us a new way of thinking about our lives and our economy. How can we have a sustainable, life-giving economy rather than a linear one that is always about more and more production no matter what the cost to nature or ourselves? I've always said, you'll only defend that which you love. So if people say, what should I do? How shall I defend the environment? Go out and fall in love with it. Fall in love with the river. Fall in love with the farm. Fall in love with the species. Just fall in love with something. Believe me, when you do, then you'll defend it.